One thing I love about practicing in this day and this age is the fact that we can practice at any time and anywhere. Because I know in other places in the world or at other times in history, it was like you could practice when you went to the monastery, and then as soon as you left, you kind of just stopped practicing. But now, today, in the time and place that we live in, we can think of practice as something that goes with us wherever we go, whether we are at a monastery or I don't know, pooping on the toilet, or today I'm going to focus on practicing at work. And I'm going to talk mostly about working at a 9 to 5 job, but I hope and imagine that a lot of it can certainly apply to being in any kind of community where you have to work together. And certainly, volunteer groups, it's groups of friends, anywhere where you have to answer to other people, which is really in any community. And I know for a fact that we are all part of a community because we are all at KBV, and I imagine that we have robust lives outside of KBV as well. So I hope that this can apply to you, whoever you are, and wherever you are in life. Some of it will be specifically about like a livelihood where you have to make money for a paycheck, though. Okay, so why do we have jobs? So obviously money or, just needing to sustain our lives, having to provide for our own requisites. And I think there are many ways to go about this. And I think it's actually really wholesome and part of being on a really healthy team where we just acknowledge that we are all there to make money. And that if any of us won the lottery the next day, we would quit our job as soon as the check cleared. And I think that is pretty healthy. I'm on a team now where that is openly acknowledged and we just kind of laugh about it. And especially when an order comes down from someone higher on the corporate ladder and it doesn't quite make sense, we just laugh about it and we just do it because, hey, as long as the check clears. And to be clear, I am not saying that we do anything unethical, but just I think anybody who's been in a day job can relate. Sometimes the orders come down and they just don't quite make sense. And we just laugh about it and we just acknowledge we are here for the paycheck. Yeah, and then I think there are some ways that people have their livelihood and money is a big focus of why they're there. And sometimes it can be not quite as wholesome or it can be just completely unwholesome. So, an example of when there could be a mixed bag is I know I've seen some people who, out of the noble intention of wanting to make a lot of money for their children, for example, wanting to provide for every comfort for their children, they can sometimes turn quite callous at work. And it's almost like they go to work every day as if they are raiding and plundering a village so they can go home and give the goods to their children. And I would really invite everyone who is making money to sustain others' livelihood to really question or to reflect on what it is they want to pass down. Because material wealth is one thing, and it's really great to, like, I myself have received a lot of material support from my parents. I am so, so, so grateful for it. And I can see all of the ways that have really set me up for success in life. And my parents also passed down the values of sila to me and of telling the truth and caring about other people. And that is, I would say, even more important. Yeah, we can pass many things down. I think my grandfather actually passed down a relationship to a certain Chinese deva to me. So it's like he was really close to this deva, and then one day I saw this deva and I was like, "What are you doing here? I don't know you." And he was like, but your grandpa did." So just as a quick aside, you can also pass down spiritual wealth. to others. Okay, and then I've certainly also seen people accumulate wealth because there can just never be enough. And that is cause for compassion because in such a mindset, then there can never really be rest. And there can never really be contentment. And the Buddha in the Dhammapada calls contentment the highest wealth. And why is that? I love that thought. And for me, the answer I've come up with is that contentment is the highest wealth because when we are contented, we really don't need anything at all. And isn't that what everyone is craving for? Like when you have a craving for a certain food or more money or whatever, maybe for me at least, the thought has always been when I get that, then I will be at peace. When I get that, then I will be contented. But if we already have contentment, then we don't need anything else. So money is certainly one motivation. Then there's also ambition. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Oh my gosh, I grew up being so conditioned to be ambitious and to make a name for myself and to make some lasting achievement to all of humankind so that I would be remembered. Oh my gosh, my dad had me read so many biographies of famous people so that I could learn to be like them. But when we practice, when we reflect on anicca, impermanence, when we really contemplate infinity, then we understand that no achievement can last. And everything, no matter how big we think it is, whatever invention that changed the world, all of it eventually is going to collide into the sun. And every invention, every giant international corporation, every conditioned thing is ultimately just another sandcastle built beneath the tide line. There was a time when I wanted so badly to be a famous author. Oh my gosh, every day, every single day, may I please have a book deal? May I please have a book deal? And I tried really hard. I tried for, I think, 10 years or so to maybe 11 to become a famous published author, to get a traditional book deal. And yeah, I got pretty close, actually. I got read and rejected by all the biggest publishing houses in the country. And as I became a better and better writer, their rejection notices became more and more warm and encouraging. And a lot of like, this book is great. We just have no idea how to market it. There is no market for Buddhist fiction. And then one night I had this dream, and this was at a point like after our pilgrimage when I was becoming very, very confident in my practice. One night I had this dream, and there were these two flowers that bloomed in front of me, and in the middle of one blossom, there was my book that was professionally designed and ready to sell, had an ISBN number and everything. And then in the middle of the other flower, there was just this slowly spinning Dharma wheel. And it really felt like to me, I was choosing one or the other. And in a second, I chose the Dharma wheel. And in a few days after that dream, the very last publisher that I was so hoping to get a book deal with sent me her rejection. And with that rejection came crashing down the last of my hope and dream to be a published author. And it was sad and it was hard in the moment, but it also felt so free and so good to let that go. And so good in a way that no giant book deal could ever hope to measure against. And a few days after that, Kyle and I got into a conflict, and I realized that I had done something to really hurt Kyle's feelings. And I apologized to the depth of my humility as much as I could. And when Kyle heard that apology, they just kind of gave me this look and they said, I have never heard you apologize that sincerely before. Thank you so much. And I really realized that for as long as I was dueling with the world and trying to get famous and trying to realize my ambitions, there was always going to be a certain hardness in my heart. This certain sense of having to defend myself against the publishers who are rejecting me and against people who wouldn't understand my book or would maybe give it bad reviews or whatever, just all the people who would come at me. And then when I let that dream go, I didn't have to defend my heart anymore in that way. And I could really humbly apologize to someone who I had hurt. And to me, that is 100 million billion times better than being a famous author. So, lots of people trying to get famous, trying to make a name for themselves. And by the way, for anyone who's trying to make a lasting contribution to humanity, and I know some of that can come from a really wholesome place of wanting to do good in the world. And if anyone would like to contemplate infinity, to understand infinity better, Ajahn Piak gave me an instruction to imagine a single hair that is bigger than the whole universe, and to sit with that and really imagine in meditation what that could look like. And usually I like to lay out my practice like a buffet line so you can just see everything, hear everything, and pick and choose for yourself what to take. And I like to be really transparent in that way as much as possible. But there is a punchline to that meditation that Ajahn Piak told me. And it is only meaningful if you discover it for yourself. So if you want to try, give it a shot. Ayya Chitananda had recommended that I try it for 3 months, and that was adequate for me to come upon the punchline. If you do come upon the punchline and want to share it with me and see if we got the same punchline, you totally can, and I would love to hear what you got. Okay. And then why else do we work? Ajahn Ganha encouraged us so much to practice through our work and to see work and working with other people as a way of bumping up against each other so that we can learn to love each other better and learn to let go of each other better. Yeah, he was a big supporter of work, and he would say 2 hours of meditation is enough for a monastic, and for all the other parts of the day, just really practice through work. And I love that. And I personally have just reaped so many rewards from really seeing all of the difficulties of work as well as practice in not just the day to day, but some of the really biggest challenges have led to a lot of breakthroughs in work for me in practice. And I also want to bring into the conversation that I recently read Ajahn Suchart's autobiography, My Way. And he was like really prevented from working by Ajahn Mahabua. And when they had a construction project at their monastery and Ajahn Suchart would show up and try to contribute, Ajahn Mahabua would chase him away and say, "There's nothing for you to do here," so that Ajahn Suchart could spend more time in meditation. And that for some people, rich practice looks like being in community. And for some people, like Ajahn Suchart, it means just diving into jhana as much as possible every single day. And how lovely it is that we are all so different. And what an adventure it is to discover what works the best for ourselves. Okay, so yeah, many reasons why we work. Those are a few. If you have other motivations why people work, I would love to hear them at the end. But for now, I wanted to offer some ways that I have practiced through work. And I've heard that this is useful, especially because a lot of people who teach about practice are either monastics who we love, or maybe, a lot of meditation teachers who are full-time meditation teachers. And I think working at a desk job or some other kind of 9 to 5 job where you have a boss who doesn't give two craps about Dhamma is really different from working in a community where there's a lot of practitioners. So I wanted to offer some examples of how I've practiced. And I definitely am not telling anybody to practice exactly in the same way that I have. Just like Ajahn Ganha and Ajahn Suchart have such different advice based on the way that they each came upon Nibbana. We each have to find what works best for ourselves. So I'm just offering one example, and it is because I have heard from others that it is useful to hear. So let's start with the ways I've practiced through having a boss. And I think a lot of people in the KBV community know the story of being like dirt. So I will save you from having to hear it again. But basically, to sum it up in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, it is that when I was reading Ajahn Suchart's autobiography, I was contemplating that all these Kruba Ajahns have, they like come face to face with suffering in their different ways. So for Ajahn Suchart, he worked a lot with fasting and letting the hunger just stir up a lot of suffering so that he could face it and overcome it and learn to befriend it and love it and let it go, etc., etc. And then for a lot of other monks, it was sitting in a tiger-infested jungle. And that was the way that they used to come face to face with their suffering. And for me, a lot of my very difficult bosses were my tigers and were my very hungry stomach. And because Kyle and I really needed the income to sustain ourselves at the time, and because I love Kyle and did not wish to dump all the financial burden on them, and I had promised them that I would do my best to work through difficult work situations, that was what kept me pressed up against the tigers bosses that I had. So all these practitioners would have a great source of suffering, and through their will alone, they would stay there facing that suffering. And for me, I had these really hard bosses, and not my own will, but because of my love for my partner, that was what kept me there working with it, and what allowed me to break through and realize that we can actually be as equanimous as dirt. So, as a quick aside, what is it that you love the most? What is it that inspires you most to face your suffering? And whatever that is, stick with it, because it's the fuel of our fire in our practice. So, yeah, working with difficult bosses has been really wonderful in a Dhamma sense. And then, besides the difficult bosses, I think that the way that I relate and hold a relationship with my bosses really depends on who the boss is. Because I have had bosses who treat me like a little servant, and they can be quite condescending and treat me like I don't know anything, which I've heard a lot of feedback from people who know me better, that if they were to describe me, perhaps one of the first words they would choose would be capable or resourceful. But there are just some managers out there who choose to see their workers as little servants. So yeah, if they treat me in that way, then I'm happy to oblige and be their servant. And here's why. Here's the huge benefit of that. Someone who can only manage through micromanaging then can only micromanage really one thing at a time. So when their eye of Sauron is on me, then it's not very comfortable. But it's only a matter of time until the eye of Sauron is trained on somebody else. And then I suddenly have a lot of free time. And then I can do whatever I want with that time. I can meditate. I can read biographies of arahants. I can watch Dhamma talks. And it is a very happy abiding for me. And then even when they are micromanaging me, for as long as I thought they should not be micromanaging me, don't they know that I am smart and I can think for myself, then it would cause a lot of frustration. Oh, someone just texted me who is not one of my spotters. Okay, let me sink back into the talk. Okay, so as long as I resisted it, then I would be very frustrated. However, I read Ajahn Chah's biography, and there was a bit about Toraman there, which was a training technique where he would just kind of intentionally torture the monks. And if it was hot, then he would make them sit in, like, I think it was like close the windows and just let the sala turn into a dry sauna. And it would be hotter and hotter and hotter, and they would have to face how hot they were. And if it was a cold day, then the windows would be flung open and they would be shaking, shaking, shaking in the cold. And they would just have to face how cold they were. And when I read this, I thought, I maybe can see my manager as my Toraman master. And when she's micromanaging me, instead of resisting it and thinking I am much smarter than this, don't you know I'm much smarter than you think, I can just go with it. And when she says, move this 2 more pixels to the right, I can just go tap, tap. What else would you like? Oh, 2 more pixels to the right. Okay, tap, tap, no problem. And then I wouldn't be suffering anymore. So that was a very fruitful way for me to practice. I have also had bosses who are just hurricanes of chaos. Oh my gosh. And wherever they go, they just stir up a lot of stress. And it really seems apparent to me that they must love it. They must love the stress. And I think I've read that even in the brain, this kind of stress can release a lot of dopamine. So I can see that in some way she must be enjoying it. And when I face that kind of boss, then I really do my best to blend into the wallpaper. And I do not want them to think of me as someone who is smart. I do not want them to think of me as someone who is capable, because if they do, they will make me work with them more. Oh my gosh. And I do not want that. So I go ahead and just make sure I do enough so that uh, you know, am not burdening the team. I do enough so I don't have to worry about my job, and I make sure not to excel too much because then they will want to work with me more. Yikes. Ugh. And then I've had the kind of boss who just sees me as a person, who is curious about where I want to go in my career, who is curious about what I can do, and who trusts me to do work. And I find that I tend to become very good friends with this kind of boss. And I, out of love and care and compassion for them, I tend to take a lot of work off their plate because, oh my gosh, they need help and I care about them and I don't want them to be so burned out. So I take work off their plate. So that's one reason why we become very good friends. And also because they see me as a person. When we are in a meeting where some bad news has broken and everybody else is stressed and I look totally relaxed, they will ask me after the meeting in a one on one conversation, why are you not more stressed? In a way that is curious. Or in a conversation where everyone's very stressed, I will also remind them, hey, it's not a big deal. This is just a deck. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't make a difference. And whatever we put together anyway, it's going to be rejected by the approver. So let's not worry too much about it. Let's just do the best we can. And for the bosses who just see me as a person and who cares about what I have to say, I can see the stress melting off their face when I say that. And when they ask me, how are you not more stressed? And I answer, then I can really hear them. I can really see them. What's the word? I can see them practicing too. And I can also see them contemplating anicca, anatta, dukkha with me, even if they have no idea what those poly words mean. And if anything, I actively encourage my bosses sometimes, the ones who see me as a person and who are curious about practice and want to learn about practice, I actively encourage them to maybe find another job where they don't have to be stressed so much all the time. And that for them to keep going up the corporate ladder is for them to sign up for more and more unhappiness. And sometimes they listen. I do feel that if anyone were to introduce themselves to me and announce that they were a CEO or like a senior director of this or a COO of that, I feel like in that very moment, compassion would arise in me because I have worked with some executives, enough executives with very fancy titles that I can see when someone is that busy and when someone is that stressed and when someone has the responsibility that when things are not working out, they will just have to come up with a list of names and say, you are all out of a job. I think it is very hard to have a gentle and soft heart when all those things apply. And not just that, but I think the higher and higher in the corporate ladder you go, the more and more BS you have to put up with. And even if you are not the one spewing the BS, everybody around you is spewing the BS. And oh my gosh, life is too short. Life is too short for that. But as always, that is just what I think. And it is our responsibility to discern for ourselves. And that's how I relate to my superiors. Next, I guess I will share a little bit about how I relate to people who are horizontal with me on the corporate ladder, so my colleagues. And there are colleagues who I really enjoy, and there are colleagues who I really do not enjoy. So let's start with the latter. And I think first and foremost, I want to say that it's okay to get irritated. It is so okay to get annoyed. And I remember listening to Ajahn Sumedho speaking one time, and he was saying, like, after one of those meetings, it is just the conditions have arisen to be irritated. It is the mind state is not pleasant. And I felt so free just to hear that even Ajahn Sumedho gets annoyed at people in meetings. So I think it is okay for everybody to get annoyed at people in meetings. And I will say, I work with a lot of people. And okay, this is the way I think about it. When I think about Kyle, for example, uh, Kyle's mind and Kyle's being to me is like a jewel with many, many facets. And every single facet, every which way I turn, just sparkles and is beautifully polished and beautiful and glittering in the light. And then when I think of the person who annoys me most at work, she is like this jewel that every single surface I see and every single way I turn it is just caked in mud. However, underneath all that mud, she is still a jewel. And as people, we have our personalities, we have our quirks. And, for Kyle, the only reason why every single facet that I see is beautiful is because all the facets that when we met almost 9 years ago, there were facets that annoyed me. There were facets that frustrated me. And over the course of the past almost 9 years, I've gotten to know very intimately all the sides of this person and this mind. And by knowing and understanding and loving and letting go, that is why those facets have become beautiful to me, every single facet. I just don't know any of this annoying person's facets close enough to love them quite so intimately. Oh my goodness, she's very annoying. Anyway, I was telling a friend of mine this analogy one time about the jewels that are either entirely caked in mud, partially caked in mud, or all the way sparkling. And she said, "Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, we're all jewels inside, whether we have a lot of mud or not. And the trick must be to focus on the fact that we are all jewels." And I was like, "No, no, 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 no." We have to see both truths at the same time. We have to see that every single blip of sentience in the world, not just humans, but animals, even the most annoying insects, we are all jewels. We all have pure consciousness. We all have sentience, and all of life is precious. And at the very same time, just as much, we have to see what is caked in mud and what is not. And this annoying coworker, I will take every opportunity not to work on the same project as her. And even if I'm on the same project, I will take every opportunity not to be in the same meeting. And if we're in the same meeting, I will take every opportunity not to be in the same conversation. But if it really cannot be avoided, and if I do have to interact directly with her, then it is with as much compassion and as much wisdom and as much loving kindness as I possibly can, because underneath all those several inches and feet of mud, there is still just a jewel. So that's how I work with annoying people. And then there are the people who I enjoy and the people who I don't know yet and am excited to get to know better and excited to work with. And then every opportunity, every interaction with this bundle of people, every opportunity, every interaction becomes an opportunity to just give them loving kindness. And if we can work on a project together and in the same time, like in the same time that it would take to do this project and not have fun, if I can do this project and have it be fun, then I'm going to choose the way that is fun. And if I'm going to speak with someone, if it can be just matter of fact, or if I can make them smile, or if I then I would choose to make them smile. And if I can choose between making them smile or making them laugh, then I will absolutely choose to make them laugh, because in some ways life is long, but in some ways life is short. And if we can laugh while we're living it, then why the heck not? You know? Yeah, every single opportunity to ask someone like, "Hey, did you do this?" If I can make them laugh, if I can make them smile, I will absolutely do it. Um, it also reaps really great results, because by the way, I have found this. In my work, I often have to ask people to do things that are not exactly in their day-to-day job description. So I often have to ask them to do like extra credit stuff. And I find that when I'm talking to a bunch of busy adults, and especially with a modern Western mind, the best ways to get people to do things that are extra credit are A, have a good relationship with them. That's one choice. Another choice is to make it fun. And the third option is to poke their sense of FOMO, their fear of missing out. So when I have all this social capital built up with these warm interactions with people, where I get to love on them every time we talk as much as possible, and I get to love on them every time we work on a project together, then when it comes time to ask them to do extra credit, then we have such a warm relationship that I can often get desirable results when a lot of other people cannot. And I think, by the way, I think people can really tell when um, People people keep texting me. No one texts me when I'm not giving a talk, and then all of a sudden, when I'm asking people to help me, uh, and for the people on the recording, I've asked the people who are present to text me if my internet cuts out, so I know whether or not I'm sitting here talking to myself in the room alone. But no one texted me all day, and then all of a sudden, I'm giving a talk and everyone's texting me. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, life is hilarious. Okay, where was I? Oh, yes. Um, I think people can really tell when the energy of loving kindness is sincere versus when it is to suck up or to get something later. Um, there are some deluded people who cannot tell, and all they want is a stroke of their ego. But most people can tell. So, yeah, when done sincerely, then all of a sudden, when I need a favor or when I need them to do extra credit stuff, then it becomes much easier. And by the way, for anyone who hopes to inspire someone else to practice, I think these three things work really well for the modern Western mind. So, positive relationship, making it seem fun, and poking at their fear of missing out. Because, we're shooting for the highest happiness here, Everything else is missing out. All right. I think that covers how I work with my colleagues. Next, I will share a little bit about how I work with people who report to me. And I really love the people who I manage. It's something about when I'm given someone to manage, like they become like my people. They're my people. I really want to take care of them. So, anyway, the first thing I do when I get someone to manage is I have a one-on-one meeting with them. And the first question I ask is, well, first I acknowledge that in 5 to 10 years, definitely in 10 years, neither of us will probably be working for this company anymore. I think just statistically, people change jobs so frequently now. So just facing the fact in probably, okay, more transparently, probably more like 2 to 3 years. In 2 to 3 years, neither of us will be working for this company anymore. So, what would you like to do after this job, after this role? And how can I help you get there? And yeah, I think people are very surprised when I ask that question. But as I worked my way into becoming more of a manager position, and I spent many years just answering to other people, and I always took notes of what I wish people did for me. And all of those notes I am implementing now, and it has been such a sweet process to make a relationship for my direct reports that I wish I had with every single one of my managers. So that's kind of like a challenge to anyone who wants to be a manager one day is like to challenge like what is the extent of your imagination to imagine a really healthy, sweet relationship that can be implemented one day. And maybe not just a manager relationship, but mm, for any relationship that you wish to grow into one day. Like, can you imagine how good it can be? And then can you implement it? Just a question to play with. All right. I also once had a really wonderful manager, and I asked her for advice on how she became such a great manager. And she said three things, and I think they are just so filled with wisdom and loving kindness that I wish to also share them now. She said, first of all, always treat your direct report like the colleague that they are. And a manager just has more veto power and they have more agency and decision making power over where the team goes, but really they are a colleague and to respect them as an equal who just happens to report to you. Two, the manager is responsible for protecting their team. So like, if someone is trying to throw someone on your team under the bus, you got to stop that. If someone is trying to take advantage of your team to really protect them, and et cetera, et cetera. If you see that they're about to do something that will embarrass them later or that is going to hurt their reputation later, to really put a stop to that too, just to really protect them. And third, that the leader of the group has to do the work, has to be willing to do even the lowest work. So she gave me an example. If there's 5 people on a team and there's 5 tasks to divvy up, then her ethos as a manager, which I have adopted and has worked really well for me, and I invite anybody else who wants to adopt it as well. Her ethos was to let every single other person on the team choose a task first, and she would take the last one. Yeah, I thought that was so beautiful and so humble, and something I definitely try to practice myself as much as possible. And I think something that has won a lot of trust with the people who report to me. I think a really good sign, like a really important sign that we have a healthy professional relationship, is that my direct reports are willing to tell me no and to express frustration. And they do it really politely. They do say like, I'm like way over capacity today. It's going to be really hard for me to take this on. And then absolutely, I will do the task instead. But I think if I have managed people before where all they did was say yes, and that was a very dangerous relationship because they would get extremely burned out, and then ooh, shit would just hit the fan, and then they would just go back to saying yes all the time again, and it was just this wild oscillation. Versus now, I have relationships where it's just very even keeled, and people are in open communication about what they're able to do, and everyone's really willing and happy to help each other out. And to me, that is definitely my preference. I, yeah, definitely had to fire someone before, and that was really interesting practice too, because it was my first time being in that situation, and the whole time caring about this person so much, caring about the fact that messing with someone's livelihood is no small thing. And just the whole time, I was wondering, even with a lot of people who wanted to see this person's employment terminated, I kept saying no. I kept wanting to try. And I kept wondering, where is the line for me? Will I ever reach that point where I will agree that the best idea is to terminate this employment? And here's what I found for me is that I am willing to put up with a lot of incompetence. I will do almost someone's whole job for them. Um, and then the line for me is when I see them bullying someone else and causing a lot of harm, or just actively causing harm at all, like doing it in a way where I recognize signs of bullying. And that is the line for me where I will terminate somebody. And boy, was that an interesting experience. Oh my gosh. Before that experience, I thought it was just like calling someone and saying, you can't come to work tomorrow. And after that experience, whenever somebody says, I had to terminate someone at work today, oh my gosh, I just have a mountain of compassion for them right then and there. It's really hard. But, I've also been on the flip side of that. I have been laid off before. And if everyone could have an experience of being laid off like the experience I had being laid off, then I wish the experience of being laid off for everybody. It was wonderful. Okay. In the moment that it happened, it was not wonderful. My manager, who is a very, very good friend of mine and became a good friend to me in that role, she was the one that was forced to lay me off that day. And I could tell she was wrecked. But in the moment, having worked with a lot of somatic experiencing before that moment, I like I could just process a lot of that stress in the moment. I was like flinging my hands a lot and just allowed the stress to pass, most of the stress, I'll say, to pass through my system, through movement, through deep breaths, through just taking a moment and feeling my feet, etc. And then I went home and I didn't have a job anymore. And then I also had my wonderful Kyle because I would get kind of really stressed about not having a job. And because of my conditioning, I felt like I would have to scour the job boards for hours every day to prove that I was looking for a job and putting enough effort into looking for a job. Um, and that one cannot just sit around and have that be enough. But my wonderful Kyle, uh, they said, you can just look for jobs for a few minutes every day. They don't pop up every single minute of every day. And after maybe half an hour, maybe it's not productive anymore. So maybe after that half hour, you can just go and be free. Just go and do something that makes you happy. And I could not fathom that at first. That was just such an outlandish idea. But another thing that really helped me understand how to be laid off well was watching the TV series called Alone. Because in this series, people are sent off into the deep wilderness and they have to survive off their survival skills alone, all by themselves. That's why it's called Alone. And I was watching the series during that time, and I was really seeing that the contestants who went out to fish every day, there were two types of contestants, if I were to categorize them. There was the type of contestant who would go out to fish every day and get really frustrated. And then there was the type of contestant who would go out to fish every day. And then even if they caught nothing, they would just go, oh, well, all I can do is try. And I got nothing today, but I will try again tomorrow. And I bet you can guess which kind of contestant was more successful on Alone. So I thought, hmm, I can really emulate the successful candidate. And every day I will just do my little bit of hunting around online. And then I actually realized that it was most effective to do this just 3 times a week, not even every day. Every other day, I would just go on and hunt for a job for about 30 minutes. And then after that, I would go and do whatever made me happy. And then through that process, I really came to feel in an embodied way that I'm not my job and that no job can define any person really. And to hang my identity on a job title was a recipe for suffering. So thank you to my Kyle and thank you to the TV series Alone. They both taught me a lot. And then I think a question that comes up a lot for people, and a question that definitely came up for me a lot when I've transitioned so many careers and transitioned through so many jobs. And one question is, at what point should I leave a job? And at what point should I try looking for another job? And for this, I would call our attention to one of the suttas the Buddha gave. I actually just looked it up recently. One of the translations calls it jungle thickets, and I think it's in the Majjhima Nikaya. But the Buddha gives advice on how to discern whether to stay or to leave a certain place, and it really comes down to whether we can practice well there. And if we can practice really well somewhere, then we should stay there for the rest of our life. And so that's tricky, right? Because I've been in situations where I was not in a good state of mind and not progressing in practice. And the right thing was to leave. And I've also been in situations where I was not in a good state of mind and it seemed like my practice was not deepening there. But because we needed the money and because I promised Kyle that I would do my best to hang on to our income, I managed to break through and learn how to be like dirt. So, and then there were situations where I was not happy. It did not seem like my practice was doing well. And then when I applied to 200 jobs and I heard nothing, then I was forced to make peace with exactly where I was and forced to learn how to practice with a difficult coworker or a difficult boss. So I guess it all comes down to, can we practice well with exactly what we have? And what does that look like? For someone, that would be staying, and for another person, that would be going. I'm going to share another story. I think this will be my last little bit before I open my eyes. But I was on a retreat one time, and the distinction between the conventional mind and the pure consciousness side of my mind became very clear. It was like there were these two sides of my mind. And then the conventional thinking mind was like a small 6 year old child who just wants cake and cookies and naps and to feel special and to be the top of the class and to get all the golden stars and to get the biggest bonus checks and etc., etc., etc. And then the pure consciousness side of the mind was where I could stand and watch that whining child with the wisdom and the love of a really good parent. And the cool thing about having these two sides of my mind interact in this way, like a parent and a child, is that in real life, when you look at a real adult parent and an actual small child, even the most attuned mother or father or just parent cannot nail it every single time. And they can't know every single time what their child needs in that moment. But when my mind is both the parent and the child, then the child cannot possibly lie to the parent. It can whine, it can complain, but because I am both, it cannot lie. So on this retreat, I would I could really feel both so tangibly. And there were times when I would see my whining child mind, my whining child mind would say, I don't want to sit in the next session. Wow, I want to nap instead. And then the pure consciousness, loving parent side of my mind will sometimes say, you know what? I think you have it in you. And better yet, I think if we do this sit together, that you're going to have a really good time. It's going to be a really wonderful, sweet sit. So why don't we go into the meditation hall and just sit down and see what happens? And then the child mind would go, oh, fine. And then off to the meditation hall they would go. And sure enough, it would be a really wonderful, sweet sit. And then there would be other times when I would stand in the pure consciousness, loving parent side of my mind. And then the whining child side of my mind would say, I don't want to go into the meditation this session. I want to take a nap instead. And because I was attuned to both sides, then I could sometimes really hear the truth behind that whining. And then the loving parent side of my mind would say, you know what? You have slayed some dragons today. You have done some really hard work. I can tell you are somewhat spent. You are pretty drained. And it would be better if we just take a nap today and skip the next session. And off they would go to the dorms and have a really great nap instead. And we can practice in that way, loving and letting go, practicing with those two sides of our minds always. And that is my reflection for this evening. I'm going to open my eyes now. Oh my gosh, I talked a long time today. Any comments, thoughts, questions are all totally welcome.
Well, I could really relate to many things you said. I'm recently retired, so I went through a lot of those ups and downs, and it took me until probably the last maybe decade before I really started to understand the value of not working so hard and not trying to be so good. And I had a boss my last boss before I retired, and he would say to me, "Have you ever considered what it might feel like to be a B student?" And I'm like, "What?" I could never do that. That would be like stealing from the company. I have to work so hard. I can't just, be a B student. But I took it to heart, and it was a good practice for me. And it really
Yeah,
did end up to where I was more effective, than I
yeah,
was when I was striving so much. So that was really sweet to remember that when you brought that up. And now in retirement, it's the same thing. I have to do it all the time too, whether, volunteer work or interacting with my partner or going to the gym. It's like everything. I just constantly, and I love the analogy that you had with the the conscious pure self and the parts inside that are not so conscious and aware, and how they can work together. It was very sweet. I really appreciated your message tonight and your stories.
thank you for that. And what you said really reminds me, like with our limited time on earth in this life, our limited energy every day, like we really have to be so particular about what we do that is at an A+ grade and what we do that is going to be B's and C's. And if we're A+ at work, what are we going to be in practice? And I would say that practice is the most important, just what I think. And if we are A+ in practice, then let's take B's and C's in some other areas of life so that we can practice that well. Yeah. I would say that there's nothing more important than peace in practice.